Okay, so folks, first of all, thanks very much for everybody who participated yesterday in the groups. For those of you who weren't here yesterday, we'll just go over it very briefly. Today what we're going to do is we're going to try to characterize these different themes. So as you see, we had a theme about the adaptive city, the personalized city, the supportive city, about quality of life. What we'd like to do is define what each means in a more succinct way. Following that definition, let's talk about the information that is required to verify and validate those themes and to make them work. How do we measure the effectiveness of an adaptive city? What data is required for those measurements? And how can we change the way in which people think about the city and interact with it so that there is more understanding and that this entity called the city, the urban infrastructure, interacts in a more open, clear and structured way with the denizens. So with that, let's start off in discussing the adaptive city. Who would like to take a shot at summarizing what the adaptive city means? Don't all answer at once. Please, Rick. Do we have a mic? Oh, here. Here we go. You got it.
I don't know about a definition of it, but certainly an observation is that it seems to be a theme that for once unites the soft professions and the hard professions. Social scientists, town planners, architects, technologists, all of those professions I've spoken to get unified around this idea of the adaptive city, because we all seem to agree that change is a more significant force now than it was previously, and that will continue to be the case. And I think we can look to someone like Kelvin Campbell, for example, in the area of architecture, as someone who has embraced this idea and trying to understand it in terms of the physical environment, and is looking to science and technology for inspiration in doing so.
Thank you. So your point really is that the notion of the adaptive city is one that unites a number of different professions, right? So who, please?
I would define it as the city that would respond to the changes in the internal and external environments with the minimum resources and energy to maintain its equilibrium status or reduce its entropy or the randomness of its own domain or environment.
Is this how you'd like to, is this what you said? Yeah.
Internal and external changes in the environment. A city that responds to the internal and external changes, not demands.
So when a city operates, right, and even plans, it requires a set of resources. Are you saying that the adaptive city does so with minimal resource requirements?
Yeah.
Okay, I think that.
Respond to because the city can need to respond to its internal changes, but actually to external changes as well.
Yes.
Exactly like a human body. Human body would respond to the sort of the change within the body itself, but actually if the environment changes, the body would respond to that. What the body actually does, it tries to maintain the energy and sort of resources. So whether it's called, it tries to keep the energy within the body, for example. It's the same thing with the city. So if the city cannot find externals, for example, resources, it needs to respond in a way that actually could maintain the same function or changes its behavior, but at the same time maintain sort of the basic sort of
functionality.
Yeah.
Okay. Does that capture it? Call it changes if you like that.
Minimum resources, so we can remove more changes than minimum resources. Yes.
So let me ask the audience here. Just because you can be efficient in a city, does it mean that it's beneficial to the inhabitants of that city?
It's not. This is why there is an extra phrase, which is to maintain sort of the minimum functionality or reduce the randomness or entropy to the system. This is why I mentioned entropy.
I worry about using the word entropy when we go out to the world.
All right. So
right.
So the basic functionality or basic or minimum requirements to its residents.
Please.
Thank you. Someone in yesterday's discussion, and I apologise, I can't remember who made the comment, but said that one of the ways that we could measure quality of life would be by measuring the amount of individual effort people have to use to create their way of life. And we contrasted that to Colin's comment about creating one's niche in a blog post. And I think this sounds like a similar concept. Individuals in the city should need to put the minimum individual effort into adapting because the city does it for them. I wonder if that's a way of capturing the thought.
Let's try that one. So let's try. The city's denizens need minimal effort to exist. It's not the right word in the city, but it's not the denizens that are going to adapt to change. It's the city that needs to adapt to them. How should we phrase it that way?
Meet their own needs.
To meet their own needs. Good. And the young lady in the back.
I'm just worried about the use of the word effort because you also want people to be physically active. When you say minimal effort, you can be a little bit. It can mean that people don't need to be physically active, right? So I think minimal stress. Minimal stress would be much better.
Let me make a couple of points.
Yes.
One with regard to this, and then secondly with regard to what we've just gone through in the last 30 seconds. And that's as an adaptive city is one that has the fortune to be inhabited by a self-informed, self-directed citizenry who understand how to engage in managing their city and planning their city.
Okay.
Which would include, for example, throwing up on this board all kinds of ideas first, and then going back, I would suggest, and refining and editing, deleting if necessary, so that you get the ideas down.
So if I, let me just stop a second before we go. So your point was, let's throw up a set of ideas before we start formulating these concepts. Is that right?
Yeah, that's just an illustration, but the main idea is that an adaptive city is fortunate to be inhabited by citizens who understand how to make change and how to manage that change.
So they understand their role in the city.
And then they play that role.
Okay. Let's put that up there. Does that capture it?
Yeah, I wanted to make 2 points,
Yeah.
and I think Rick might have covered the first one, but it's really this issue of balancing the needs of the individual. So a city that is able to be adaptive for the needs of the individual and for the needs of the many. So it is kind of trying to find that right trade-off such that it doesn't feel like you're being kind of controlled to some urban optima that does not add stress to you. So I think that issue is probably kind of implicit in there somewhere, but it came out in quite a few different modes in the conversation we had yesterday. And the other one, and we're not far from the Natural History Museum, so excuse me for paraphrasing an evolutionary scientist, but when we start talking about minimal resource requirements and so on, it reminds me of some of the lack of, well, I think some of the misquoting that goes on of Darwin in the sense people often think of what he said was about finding, optimizing yourself to local conditions, where actually I think he said, and I'm going to paraphrase in an urban context, that it's not the strongest cities that will survive, but those most responsive to change. And I think that's kind of what captures a lot of the aspects of an adaptive city, that we're not thinking about the city that's necessarily most resource efficient, because that often conflicts with adaptivity. It's not necessarily the one that's most resistant to mega floods or whatever, but one that is actually responsive. So that kind of word, I think, nicely captures a whole host of the issues.
So how would I encompass what you just said? What would be a one-liner for that? Just to reiterate your point. Your point being that
Okay, it's perhaps it's not an adaptive city is perhaps one that encompasses facets of strength and resilience and a whole host of other things, but it's also one that isn't. I'm just trying to think of a nice way of phrasing it, but I suppose it's not locally optimized to the conditions right there at the time. It's able to respond in a much broader space, so it might not be at its most efficient, it might not be at its most strong, but it's able to respond to whatever the world throws at it. And
so let me.
It could be, yeah.
So
Depends,
we go back to
contentious
this word of word resilience, right? No, 1 second in. One of the things about this adaptive city is that in any city, we often have these conversations, what is it optimized for? In the end, there's a governance structure around the city, and in the end, somebody makes a decision, some of which are quite inchoate, but somebody makes a decision as to what's going to happen, what the objective of the city is. Could I ask the audience, who and what is that? Who makes decisions in cities? You can use the word, but who makes those decisions? Sir?
In London,
Yes,
democratically elected mayor.
the mayor.
And
Oh.
decision systems filter down from that point.
Okay, thank you. So that was just for the recording. It's in London, that's a democratically elected mayor, and decisions flow from there.
Shane, you were going to get earlier on.
Yeah.
So let me just take, this is going to be a set of just notes, okay?
Do you want to answer to that question? I had one more comment.
Please, go ahead.
And that was, aren't you familiar with the capability maturity model? And
Yes.
Software engineering? That's what I thought of when I saw the adaptive city. It's the capability maturity. It's what the highest level is, the optimization level of the capability maturity models, where it's continually interacting with its environment, sensing its environment.
Yes.
And has continuous processes that optimize it, but then we get to your question, Jurij, which is optimizes it for what and for whom?
Yeah.
And what's the objective? Now, I was going to say in my town, those decisions are made by an elected city council and mayor.
Keep talking,
under the
please.
considerable influence of other individuals who pay for campaigns.
So, just to go back, what you mentioned was that part of this is again, the governance structure that makes the decision, right? But you also mentioned the maturity model. I was looking for it. We built a maturity model for cities some time ago, and somehow never exercised it. But I think that's a very, very good point. Ian, you wanted to say something? Yeah, I think Ian was before. Yeah. Sorry, I'm keeping count.
It reminded me of some of the work that Stephen Tyler had done around climate and resilience, and he seemed to capture what adaptivity is all about in about 6 key phrases. So one is flexibility and diversity. We talked a lot about that yesterday. Redundancy and modularity. It's things fail safely. It's designed to do that. It's got resourcefulness, so it can mobilise assets to do new things. So it can kind of transform itself. It's responsive in that it can understand what's going on. It's got situational awareness and it's got foresight. And lastly, it kind of summarises all of this. It's got the capacity to learn. And I think it's the combination of all of those things that creates adaptivity.
Thank you. Got that. I want to find that maturity model. Sorry, Shane. Up to you now.
No, I think you'd got to that point, Richard's point to the resilience, one that I was thinking that's the way that it could well be framed also.
Yeah.
And that was an excellent point just before about a city that is modular perhaps and divisible, and so it has many stakeholders. And to that point where we got to, I mean, in London, and I mean, I wouldn't say that at all, that it filters down from the mayor.
Yeah.
That's not the way that London operates. It's much more complicated than that.
How does
and there are
it
many stakeholders, and they're all unique in every circumstance.
And how do they make decisions? What's the objective function? There's multiple, I presume, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a good point.
There's the difference between public and private.
Right, yeah, just a little. Please, Richard wanted to.
I was just going to say something about governance. I mean, there are a whole host of individuals and organisations all making decisions with their own objective functions that will never, in many cases, be able to articulate. Some of the actors in London, for example, owners of the infrastructure, Australian investment banks, Hong Kong investors, and they make decisions entirely with some other objective function, not necessarily for the benefit of the citizens of London. So I think actually there is very and the mayor in London has even less power than a typical American mayor. So it's very little is really sort of achieved. He's more of a what's the word? A kind of a figurehead for bringing people together and helping to make things happen. And I think the mayors of London have been reasonably successful at that, but they don't have very much power at all. So there's a whole complex set of interacting agents who have a whole host of different objective functions, and trying to imagine what they are is close to impossible, I imagine. And that's maybe what the adaptive city does. It doesn't try and articulate what those objective functions are at any one time, but responds to what it seems to think people are trying to achieve or at instantly. But
I go back. You say it responds to what people are trying to achieve. Those words, what people are trying to achieve, are the objectives, right? There are objectives in a city, and they're driven, as you say, from multiple aspects. But somehow the city moves forward. Somehow it happens. And I think part of the problem is that it's very difficult to verify what actually are the outcomes in cities. So specifically, we had this meeting, be over to a second. We had this meeting at Metropolitan Planning Council in Chicago. In the room, we had aldermen, basic city councilmen. We had developers, we had architects, we had investors. We had people from companies like Cisco, Siemens, and IBM. And we asked a question about a project that actually been done in Chicago. We asked the developer, how did you measure the success of your project? And they couldn't give us they couldn't give us an answer. They said, well, we put up the development, we sold a number of the properties. But how were they measuring success? And the only person that stood up and said, I'm being measured on success, was the alderman who was being elected. And he said, when something goes wrong, they come to me. And when I get re-elected, that's how I know I'm successful. And the problem is, in most cities, there are no good metrics that verify the outcomes of decisions. Sorry, if I may, Rick and then the young lady, and then you, Marjan, okay?
Thanks, Yuri. I've strongly agreed, actually, with all of the last few contributions around the sort of very organic, complex nature of cities and where decisions get taken in them. I wonder if something from service science is useful in this. Service science has the concept of an affordance of a system, which is the ability of a system to make its resources and capabilities accessible to actors within the system to make use of in their own context to achieve their own objectives. So I think there is something about an adaptive city as being one that offers affordances to all of the actors within it to create value in their own context. So, Yuri, I know that you're looking for something that doesn't have too much jargon in it, and there was a lot of jargon in that, but those are quite precisely defined terms in service science, and I think they're useful ones. The other one, getting back to the comment you've just made about the objectives at city level, so you need probably an elected body with a mandate and some responsibility to create those objectives at a high level. How do you then flow those objectives down to influence all of the hundreds of thousands of decisions that get taken in a city every day? One of the hypotheses that I think is interesting there is the role of alternative currencies. So could you set a cost on the use of an affordance using an alternative currency that somehow tries to match the cost of an affordance to its impact against citywide objectives? I don't think there's any data points of really trying to do that yet, but I think that sort of philosophy is behind the spread of alternative and local currencies at the moment.
So what's the meaning of a local currency?
I'm not sure I can get an economic definition, but either a currency that is accepted in lieu of universal currency within a regional economy, so the Bristol pound or the Brixton pound here in London are examples of those. The mayor of Bristol is having his salary paid entirely in Bristol pounds, for example. It's
must be wealthy.
Yeah, he is. That is true. But
also economically counterproductive.
And I know. Yeah, I know Shane has that opinion, so I'm not saying it's universal. It's certainly controversial, but it's an interesting idea. The precedent for this is the Wehr in Switzerland, which has operated since the 1930s, which is similarly a complementary currency. And the difference between the Wehr and the national currency is that when debt can't be repaid because you've gone bankrupt, in the Wehr there's a system of barter that allows you to repay the debt in kind. It was set up by business people following the 1930s depression when banks weren't lending to small business. And that might sound a familiar situation.
Can I ask a question? I get a turn.
Go ahead, Colin. I'm just pass the microphone to the lady behind you. Go ahead, Colin. Yeah.
So, do we think that the adaptive city requires new forms, a new form or new forms of governance, in which citizens are, or at least have the option of being actively involved? This is not necessarily a council chamber with people sitting in the room, but through electronic mechanisms. Or is the adaptation driven essentially passively by the city observing what it is that people do or attempt to do.
I'm not sure I'm going to completely answer that, but I will touch upon that just a little bit. To me, the adaptive city, I wonder if, we've talked a lot about changes and not only, but to me, it's not very ambitious if it's only about adapting to changes, but rather, do we have a further goal? And then we've talked about that, and I wonder if that further goal could be a health promoting city, or a citizen participation city that promotes social interaction and participation in the local governance. So I think that would be one of the goals, and there are metrics to consider whether that a city is successful in that. And in terms of who makes those decisions, everybody makes those decisions, and there's a hierarchy, of course. Maybe the role of government is to enable citizens to make decisions that are most health promoting for themselves, and that encourage them to participate in city governance, etc.
Who was next?
Marjan, I think.
I just wanted to say that one element that seems to be missing for me is a sense of vision and leadership. I think an adaptive city, a successful city, needs to have a strong vision and a strategy to support it. But it also needs economic resilience. And the economic resilience needs to be very strongly linked to the vision. And so, for example, if it gears itself around health and well-being, it should develop an economy around it. If it gears itself around climate change, and a city can only do so many things, but it needs to have 2 or 3 key visionistic drivers, and it needs to resource it and build its economy around it.
So it's going to build economy around a vision, right?
Yes.
Or is it going to build a vision around an economy?
Well, I think they have to influence each other.
What do you think comes first?
I think if it were me,
Yeah.
we have drawn many parallels to organizational learning, etc. And if it were me and relating it to organization and senior management of organizations, you would learn where your major strengths are and then develop a vision.
So you build on your strengths, is that and build a vision on the strengths. Is that what you're saying?
But your vision on the strengths and also the external drivers and needs, but internal strengths, but also external drivers and needs.
Could you give us an example of cities that may have done that well?
That's difficult.
I know, I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but there's some gentleman in the back. Sorry, go ahead, Marjan.
Just as an example of a city that's adapting to an observation in terms of what's on the rise would be London at the moment in terms of the tech hub, digital shortage, and the number of TSB initiatives around enabling tech companies.
Could you speak up, please?
Sorry.
It's working, it's just...
Okay. It's just the example we can see it ongoing in London today is the investment that's going into what's known widely as the digital economy now. They've observed that most products, most businesses, most systems are using some level of technology in their work, and they're now driving that forward. And there are good examples of London acting as an adaptive city in that context today.
So you think London is a good example?
We'll see.
Sorry, there's somebody else? Go ahead, so Antti Jussi. Sorry, not Antti Jussi. I have a friend called Antti Jussi Suominen, and it's not Antti Jussi, it's Antti.
Yes, hi. I just read the blog post from Joe Courtwright, and I really like the people-centered view in that post. And he was asking what is smart city, so it's a city where are smart people. So in the same kind of thought, maybe what is adaptive city, the city where the people are adaptive. And I remember yesterday in the wrap-up, I think the group that was speaking about adaptive city, they went through the disasters, 9/11 and Katrina, and what happened after that. And basically it was the communities of people who took action in this kind of extreme situation, need for adaptation. And so back to the point, what kind of city supports that the people can be adaptive? What makes people more adaptive? I think it's that you have trust between different groups of people, so that you are not alone in the big city. You know people, strong networks, that kind of things. A little bit kind of different direction than looking for the how can you measure the outcomes of different projects and who makes the decisions. Also, for that point, I think it was comparing the companies and the cities, there was this notion that there are hardly any companies older than 50 years, but there are many cities that have survived for thousands of years, so they are really adaptive, and I think it's because they are not very centralized, because there is no really anybody making the decisions and measuring the outcomes, but because there are so many decisions that compete each other, so it's about the people.
Thank you, Antti. I'll take one more comment and remind the audience that we still have the personalised, supportive, and the other terms, right? Although I think we're covering quite... okay. But you wanted to make a comment?
Yeah.
Let's make Colin work for his supper, shall we?
Yeah. Coming from the city where Joe Courtwright lives and works, and I work with him quite a bit.
In Portland.
In Portland, Oregon. And having served in elective office and as the chair of the Planning Commission there, and then teaching this kind of information too, the most frustrating is trying to teach it. The simplest is actually serving in the influential role of a planning commissioner. And I suspect that may be the case to some extent in London. It's very much the extent in Chicago, New York, and elsewhere. And when it comes down to the question of how do you measure, what are the objectives, I've been in the same kinds of meetings, and those representing industry are the most frustrated because they want to see one or two objectives.
Right.
Cities don't do that for the very reason that you articulated so well. There are so many objectives and metrics, and if you miss them, you might fail the whole project. But as long as you understand them, and you can certainly enumerate them, there will be a financial, there will be a social, there will be an economic, a political, infrastructural, architectural, all of that. And you need to understand all of those. And good city planning does that well, articulates that, and builds that into its plans, which are then built, then you move on and put them into the policies, which are carried out by the elected officials. And I think in the most personalized cities, and adaptive, you actually find the leadership, while it certainly makes some decisions, those decisions are influenced by and large by non-elected officials. And it makes for messy democracy, but it seems to work. And yes, it has seemed to work in several North American and European cities. And that's the difficulty I think other cities elsewhere in the world have. They want to adopt the structure, the skeleton of a democratic Republican system. But that is a good system is built on a citizenry who are informed enough to involve themselves and influence the process. And that's where you move from the pure science of democracy to the art, and that's a difficult move.
Okay, a very good point. I'll make one point, please, Marjan.
One last point. It's more of an observation, but maybe trying to put everything into matrix is the problem itself. Trying to capture everything quantitatively to see how you are doing, and that's a management problem, which then trickles down into how we govern organizations that with such complex systems, just simple numeric matrix may not be a suitable way forward.
Okay. So I would like to respond to a number of these things from experience. One is that cities waste a lot of resources because there is no single view of the city. Giving parts of the city the ability to have a single view doesn't create another hierarchy, it doesn't create another strictures. It provides the different parts of the city the understanding of the impact of what they do on other parts of the city. So for example, and we'll show this afternoon, in Cambridge, Ontario, we work with the city, about 120, 150,000 people, where their planning process was each agency involved in the city, and luckily they still managed them, they didn't outsource them, competed for dollars to improve their part of the business. So whether repaving the road made sense to the guys who were trying to reline the sewers, there was no correlation. Right? So when they planned to fix a bridge, repave a road, reline a sewer, replace the communication network, it was all done independently. And you know what that leads to. It was all done independently because there were no tools to allow the parts of the city to see what each other were doing and the consequences of those actions. So we built them the tools. In every city, you know that there is a lifetime for each part of the city. There's a known curve for how long a road will last. There's a known curve for how long it takes before you have to reline the sewer. If you draw a map of all the components in the city and explain how long a piece of the infrastructure has to live, you can make financial decisions that connect all the different parts of the city. So instead of people competing for dollars with no understanding of what the different parties were doing, they now have a map of the consequences of their decisions, and they can make those decisions. So it's not that, you know, cities can be adaptable because they exist in separate silos. Yeah, there's probably some part to that. There's also a huge waste in most cities because there's no single view about their objectives. Okay, I'm going to get off my soapbox. Thank you very much. Let's get on to the personalized city. Colin, do you remember what the idea was behind that person? Who was running that? Shane. I know where we started. I'm just wondering where we ended. Do you have a... Colin, there you go.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, it's some of the points that have come out here later here.
Right.
The how a city can be appropriate, fits the requirements and needs and engagement that that individuals want to have in their city. Right. And there's two angles to that we're framing yesterday. You know, the personalized city defined as how you can interact with your city, some sort of level of civic engagement, whether that is passive or active. And the second one, you know, your personal experience, typical sort of day in the life journey. And you know, we defined 4 typologies, if you will, of that. You participate actively, passively. Thirdly, the one where you'd make a conscious trade-off around trust, personal data security issues, and then one where you really just try to recreate it in your own way and use this contentious word, the anarchic city. But it's you know, that there are many examples where people are out there hacking their city. And, you know, it's reflective of the points that you've made earlier about, you know, cities are really messy, actually, and it's, you know, and there are others that have expanded on that sort of line of thinking. That's where we got to yesterday, and, you know, so it's those 2 ways that I categorized it, your personal experience and the way that you want to engage with the wider community.
So I think this is very apt. Your point again is that the personalized city is characterized by the methods by which individuals interact with the city and the city interacts with them, right? And your point also was there's many modes. There's passive, there's active, there's some combination of the few. Good. I think we can build on that. Anybody comments? Yeah, yeah.
That's where we got to.
No entropy, though, okay? No quantum entanglement either.
I think a personal city is the one that gives the feel that everything is designed around that person while they are living in that city. For example, if you have somebody with a disability, they will feel that everything is designed for them and for their use. If you have someone with children, there are facilities there for that. If people who like cycling, for example, they have the cycling routes. If they are the drivers, there are sort of good roads for that. So it gives the feel that everything is designed around that
That's
person.
a great idea. I really like that. Very good idea. How do we do this? I'm not going to ask you to answer the whole thing, but do people have some good ideas as to how we might do that? Sorry, it's bypassed. Okay.
I'll make the same comment as in the last discussion. For me, this speaks of affordances from service science again. So an affordance might be that planning permission lets me set up a pop-up shop on a high street for any purpose, providing it's for less than 3 days. Or an affordance might be an open data platform that allows me to use data for whatever I can create value for. Those are things that a city provides, not with a specific objective in mind, but so that I can create something that means value to me in context.
So, but when you say affordance, do you mean permission? Is that what it means, affordance?
An affordance it's a potential. So it's something that's made available by an ecosystem, but isn't enacted until an actor
so
uses it to do something. Okay. It's an ability or capacity within a system.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else? Please, sir.
I think we can design the city to achieve some of these objectives, but sometimes the city will evolve to achieve that gradually.
Right.
And sometimes we need people engagement, actually, because that's part of how the city will evolve to cater for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's very difficult for decision makers actually to think about every person and everything. But actually, if we allow it to evolve and people engage in discussion and actually engagement, which will allow that to happen, probably.
Let me ask you something then. Do you think it takes strong personalities in cities to drive something in one direction and then for the rest of the city to follow? Or do you think things organically evolve to a point?
I think both. We need a combination, because sometimes you need people to drive,
Right.
and sometimes you need people who would encourage that and actually participate in discussion and in their opinion. And I think with the internet technology and sort of open forums, it's becoming more and more easier for cities to communicate actually and get a good decision with minimal effort in a way.
Did you want to say something? Please, Marjan.
One thing, it's already been said before, but the harmony between this personalized aspects and the community aspects and the city aspects. So it's not all selfishly driven, but respects everybody else around them.
So one particular thing I think about cities is, an observation is that if you try to engage your denizens, very few actually care. Right? Most of the time the people engaged with the city are because there's some issue that they have with that city. Some are very strident about that, and they get the change because of the stridency. But how can one figure out what people in cities really want? Are there ways in which one can do that? Is it enough to go, please, Antti? Is it enough to go to Twitter and Facebook? Personally, I don't think so. Because, anyway, please go ahead, Andy.
Okay, for me, I always try to make a difference when speaking about city as a city organization or city as the people or the concentration of human interaction or whatever. And I really like more that the city is the concentration of human interaction. And in that sense, if people are allowed to do many more things, I don't need permission for everything and anything that I do. I can put my shop and I can sell ice cream and things like that. Then there comes the organic development of the city, and that's the real power of the cities. And city organization, it may be some mayor this year and next year some other, maybe strong personality or maybe not, and can do something, but that's not really so important. I think if the people, all the millions of citizens, they are more active in their daily life. They don't interact with the city organization, not in Twitter, not in any kind of forums, because that's not the way people interact with the city. The way that people interact with the city is that they live there, they work there, they do their daily lives, and that's the interaction.
But are you saying that we should not have any rules or structure in city?
Yes, there are need for rules, but I think less is better. And good city is city what needs quite little rules, and it works still. More rules you need, more deeper you are in the problems.
Probably, but I don't know how to resolve that question of what are the structures that are required in a city to make it work, and how much is too much? Do we have any notion of how we measure that? Give us an example of a city where you think it's not over-regulated and it works well. Don't say London again, and it won't be Rochdale either. Rick?
So I only know of this second-hand at best. There may be someone in the audience who knows it better, but I understand that in Lisbon there was an area between the existing city centre and the waterfront that had previously been dominated by commercial docks that had declined and weren't in use, and that planning regulation was completely opened up so that the self-build community and others could move in and make what use of the environment made sense to them. And the city committed to, once something had been done that was generating value, figure out how to legislate to support it afterwards.
Okay, so I'm going to put you down and come back to you on what that is. Anybody else? Sorry.
I think this probably relates to a city that's got this personalised aspect, has got aspiration, either to do something like the London Olympics, or to fix something like the Docklands that are in a real state. And if it's got that aspiration, it also kind of connects to the adaptive. It's got a reason to adapt, and it can come together and do that, and all sorts of people can start improving things because they're adding to that bigger aspiration. And that aspiration often comes just from the stories that people tell, whether it's the politicians telling stories or the people complaining and telling stories. So aspiration's key.
That's a good one. Any recent examples of cities with high aspirations who have accomplished these tasks, please?
Well, I would agree that high aspirations are elemental, and I can think of several. My own city, Portland,
absolutely.
San Francisco, Boston, Sydney, Barcelona, Amsterdam, and I could go on. Are cities that have several common characteristics. They have established visionary plans, great aspirations. They have established some, not so much rules, but structures of commissions, committees that interact with each other well, interact with the private sector. And they all have developed both their visions and their structure personally. They have personalized those structures, those visions, to their own, let's call it the personality of their city.
Yeah.
That gets back to this,
Right.
you know, Maslow's self-actualized
Right.
cities, as it were. I get back to the City Museum,
Yes.
which I come from, whose job it is to help define and refine that sense of personality and sense of place. And in my field, this is what we study, how cities understand who they are and how they can continue to be who they are and adapt and grow, you know, I think following the themes of this conference.
So they learn from history.
They're learning cities and self-learning cities.
Okay, thank you. What about Singapore? Go ahead, Colin.
If I could just comment on Rick's observation about Lisbon, which I think might be true of Barcelona too. District 21, is it Barcelona? There's an economist who moved to NYU about 2 years ago, Paul Roma. Paul Roma. And Paul had been an advocate, in fact might still be an advocate, of what he called charter cities, which was the idea that if you had a district like the Port District in Lisbon that was going to be redeveloped, that you give it a separate charter from the city itself with a different set of rules and regulations that would encourage the kind of innovation adaptation that we're talking about here. I don't actually know if he's ever had a chance to try it out. Really, I mean, it's a beautiful concept, but legally it might be very difficult to implement. Anyone know?
Again, I only know of it secondhand. I don't know if anyone in the room knows it more directly, but Hafen in Hamburg, I was in Hafen City, yeah. Edward Glaser at a World Bank conference last year said that they had somehow got a policy that rents should be lower for artists and creatives than for other uses, and what they were trying to do was stimulate those people to move in as a precursor to actually this Shoreditch model of technology entrepreneurialism. Now, you talk to people from Shoreditch, they say that's what attracted them to Shoreditch in the first place, but whether anyone's managed to sort of deliberately cause that path of events to follow up is much more doubt.
Okay. Could I comment on Singapore? Who knows much about Singapore? Some. So, a few comments. When the British left Singapore in the late 50s or something like that, it was a swamp. And the Singaporeans decided that they were going to do something different from all the other colonies, which was they're going to continue to ask for foreign direct investment. And they made a decision to build a city-state which was technically competent. And so today, what you see are engineers and scientists in all areas of government. Today, when you go to get an apartment from the Singaporean government, you get your first apartment, you get a discount for it. You go there and you look at the areas where you can get an apartment, and depending upon your race, they have a distribution of races in each region, and you have to fit into the distribution. So if you're Indian and if the part of the region you're looking at has 45% Indians, they look at the capacity and who's in there already and see if you fit. In New York City, it can take a long, long time to get a building permit. In Singapore, you can go and get it all done in the morning. I would say Singapore is a city-state which is very open with its data. It can be a bit nanny-like in some ways, it's true. But it's certainly one where they've organized themselves well around a set of principles, and it seems to have worked. Some people would say it's a dictatorship also. Some would say it's a benevolent dictatorship, right? My own experience in being there for 2 weeks working with the different agencies on one that we call a Smarter Cities Challenge was that for the first time I felt like I was privy to open data. There wasn't much that was hidden. I was significantly challenged in my mathematical and engineering skills in dealing with the agencies who understood things like statistics. They understood machine learning. They understood how we did things. And yeah, you could certainly call it a dictatorship. I'd call it a benevolent dictatorship. And I hope this doesn't go on the air in the wrong way, because I'm very fond of Singapore. But on the other hand, you know, they also have a challenge in that they've built this cadre of engineers and scientists, and now they're looking for creatives to take them to the next level. So, okay, enough of that, Shane.
Those examples. I mean, you could add Austin to that. Charleston, South Carolina. There's good things going on there.
What about India, China?
Well, I was sitting here thinking, what's going on in Asia and Middle East? Are the places that have got that, you know, I guess the vibrancy, really, of all of these places that are listed on the slide. Anybody have any good examples?
Good examples.
I think bad examples also, like Masdar, like a vision.
Well, that's, you know, I wouldn't even just call it a city; it's a development, right? You know.
Well, a development, but a vision which captured the whole globe and then suddenly dropped into the oceans.
Yeah. You know, it's a development. So same with Songdo as well. You know, it's about 50,000, 60,000 people. My small town is bigger than that. That's not a city. If you define it in an agglomeration of people. But my point, the central point here, just to expand on, you know, all of those cities have found means to engage broader partnership or collaboration of some sort with public-private sectors, startup businesses. The example in Amsterdam Innovation Motor, has been fantastic to someone from this representing the city has got the space to engage with companies like mine and yours and local businesses to take in new directions with unknown outcomes and not being charged to deliver that, you know, in any tangible near-term sense. And I think they've been very successful in the longer term. And the central DNA of all of those is someone's got some leadership. Yeah. There's an individual, and that in lots of those cases it's the mayor. Yeah. But it doesn't have to be. But someone's got leadership there, and you do need that to cut through the noise and give a direction. But that doesn't negate the point that can't be successful alone. You have to have engaged this wider community, and that's the only way that it becomes successful.
So could you just repeat, for the audience, let's talk briefly about Masdar and Songdo. Marjan, would you actually tell us about Masdar?
Masdar was supposed to be the first city in the world which is carbon neutral. So they developed, first of all, a university there, which was all about low carbon and renewable energy university. And they were building the city. They brought in consultants and engineers and technologies from around the world to understand how to capture the renewable energies. The sun is this massive amount of solar gain. And so how do they cool the buildings? They put loads of PVs in, but they weren't sufficient to meet the energy demands. They needed other renewable energy sources, etc. And then suddenly, as soon as the credit crunch started, the whole plan suddenly dropped. And all of the investment was just pulled away from the city. So
it was a very visionary idea, right? For 80,000 people, they were going to build a city for about $22 billion. At the time, when the price of oil was $150 a barrel. So it was quite affordable.
But it was capturing everybody's imagination.
It was.
So globally, it was beginning to become the hub of the green economy.
Right. It did, and I think in many ways, it started IBM's Smarter Cities business. Colin was out there first of IBM. We pulled in a whole group of people from around IBM because this is very exciting to us. I think that's what it was born. Seema. And then we'll talk about Songdo, okay?
So I'd like to add a little bit about Masdar. Yes, it was a great vision, and I was that unfortunate person who was responsible for actually putting those utilities in place once the whole vision had been created and all of that. Right. And as I was, even before Marjan talked about it, I was thinking that, you know, sometimes you have this great and exciting vision. Right. And every step of the way, even though the sponsors of the program would say to me, You just need to go to the water authority or to the power authority and tell them that you're from Masdar, and you'll get everything worked out. And believe me, they would just look at me and say, what are you talking about?
Right.
That's not how it works. We have our own regulations. We have this, that, you know. And then there were all the other challenges of the way that whole vision was laid out as, and the private-public partnership that was meant to come into place in these little grids that were the three-storied structures that had to house the utilities.
Right.
So it was, you know, there was the recognition right there came about as what was much more important, probably equally important than the vision, was the need for the regulatory and policy framework to be in place, and that the public-private partnership angle needed to have been thought out a lot more and a lot earlier than alongside the vision.
It was a huge leap of faith. It was a massive vision. It was inspiring.
It was, but it just...
Well, I think what killed it actually was when they withdrew the investment. While the investment was there, the project was still continuing. And actually, it could have significantly led to economic regeneration, growing and developing new types of economies, etc. But it was the investment that killed it, and because it was a vision, as you say, without any infrastructure to support it, and you just had to have the leader to drop it at the drop of a hat, and the whole scheme would collapse.
You know, something reminds me, we've got two other topics to deal with. And then, please, well...
I wouldn't put down Songdo as didn't work. I think it's a work in progress, right? And it's the same with any development. Just in context, it's one part of the free economic zone set up near Incheon Airport, which was sold on a multi-decade lease to a developer, and our company got involved, and you know, and a grand ambition, which I think that everybody should learn from. You need to put the digital infrastructure in from the start, and then the various sort of services that feed from that. I mean, there is a particular model. We're working with Korea Telecom, you know, Korean companies in developing services for residents. But any placemaking takes decades, right? And so it's part of a journey, and it's taps into a very vibrant economy and the need for people to live in places. And why wouldn't you want to do in that way?
So the difference here, Shane, is unlike Masdar, the Korean government invested tens of billions of dollars to build this city with the intent we're going to build it and they will come. And the people are still in the process of moving to this city. I would say the engineering in that city is phenomenal. It's out of this world. On a flight there I was sitting next to a guy from Westinghouse who was putting in some nuclear reactors. And he said that in the States it takes 10, 12 years to get a reactor in place. In Korea it took them 2 years to get them put in place. And he felt that the engineering was beyond world class in that case. So if you get a chance to look at Songdo, take it. It's a phenomenal investment. The engineering is equally phenomenal. It's interesting to see who's moving in. It's interesting to see how they're going to develop it. But it's a long-term investment by the Korean government, and hats off to them.
Just comment on this. It struck me, well, actually going all the way back to Masdar, it struck me that there's a challenge in here in creating these new cities, particularly when Masdar is relatively isolated. It's not totally isolated. It's right next to the airport and one or two other developments, but it is was intended to be a fairly independent kind of city. And the question I had for many people at that time, including myself, was, you know, how do you create the soul of a new city? Yeah, you can pour the concrete and do the steel work, and you can invite people to come and live there, but how do you create community? How do you create a lot of the sort of attributes that we've been talking about here? I don't know anyone who knows really how to go about that, but you know, clearly in China, India, where they do need to build large numbers of new cities, somebody is eventually going to figure that out.
I don't think they care about the soul of the city.
Well, Masdar certainly didn't. I used to kid on their target citizen was a PhD engineer, but PhD engineers have 5-year-old daughters and 80-year-old fathers.
Thanks, Colin. I just was thinking, I've got one other example to throw in that's from the UK rather than a high-growth economy, which is the east side area of Birmingham. It has a 50-year history as one of the least economically active areas of the city. It's the area just to the east of the city centre. It's cut through by the train line from Birmingham to London. It's always had Aston University there, and it's always had a fledgling science park there, but it's never had much else. They put Millennium Point there as the city's Millennium Project, and that kind of sat there with an IMAX cinema and nothing much going on around it for years. But in recent times, Birmingham City University has moved its campus from an outer suburb to the east side zone. Birmingham Metropolitan College has done the same thing. So that's around about 100,000 students increased in the area now. They've built a new city park, they're changing the physical landscape, and it is starting to become a new vibrant zone immediately adjacent to the city centre, and residency of start-up companies at the science park is through the roof now. They've just won investment for extending their space.
That's good. Thank you, I've got it down. Let's go to supportive city. Is there anything to be said about supportive city that we haven't said so, sir?
We need supportive city because the adaptive, we committed on the city in general behavior and personalized on the individuals. So supportives, I would assume, already covered by either.
I think that's true.
No, actually, I beg to differ because.
No. Sorry.
No, because I think what came out of yesterday's discussion was this need for creating social engagement, and somebody has to take the responsibility of creating this social engagement. And currently that doesn't exist, that the cities provide information, but more information overload than social engagement. New models of social engagement are needed and they don't exist. And it's to do with ownership and driving.
I couldn't agree more. In fact, as I said, IBM had this thing called the Smarter Cities Challenge. What we do is we send a request to all the cities around the world to send us their problems, and we'll send 5 people to work on those problems for free for 3 weeks. Could I ask the audience, what do you think the main problems cities asked us to deal with? A guess?
The economy.
Sorry?
The economy.
The economy, good.
Congestion on the roads?
Congestion on the roads, a good one.
Waste management.
Waste management. No, it was communication with the citizens. Over 80% of the respondents said the number one priority was communication with the citizens, the denizens, right, which is what you're talking about. It's this social engagement. The city systems, I mean, the politicians want to get re-elected. It's just a natural thing. And our experience was working with cities was we'd come in and say, let us help you fix the traffic. And the mayor's office says, yeah, okay, but we want you to help us get the message out to the denizens to get support for that. So communications is clearly a very important part of this. And there's no good mechanism, right?
But it's probably because it's a top-down communication. They want to get their message.
Yes,
they don't necessarily.
That's exactly correct. Yes, it's true. But if there was, if they could have a mechanism, even if it was just bottoms up, they'd take it. What do we have today? Cities put up websites, they ask for comments, they ask you to sign up for messages, for email, for SMS. What mechanisms can we provide cities to communicate our desires and wants? There's a lady here who hasn't spoken, and we need more engagement.
So I've seen a documentary about Bogota. I don't know if you know this case, but it's quite inspiring because they try to change the whole transport system. And first of all, there was no communication between the different drivers. And what they did is to put clowns in the cities in order to make people understand what was right and wrong in terms of the new laws that were implemented in the city.
Clowns?
Clowns, yeah. So there was a clown in every intersection saying, you're right, you can go. You're wrong, you can't go.
I see.
Yeah, and actually it worked. Of course, it took like some months or even like 1 or 2 years, but the guy was re-elected. So.
Would you call it some method of gaming? Is that what you would call it? Gentleman back there. Oh, sorry. Anti's up.
Yeah, I quickly continue from the Bogota example. I don't remember the name of the mayor, but he's really world famous, and I should recommend. Who? Peñalosa. Yeah, Peñalosa. And he had many crazy ideas, including the clowns that actually worked. Another one was that there was a problem of water consumption, that it was too little water for the big city. And the mayor went to television, took his clothes off, and showed how to use showers, so that you actually put soap first and then open the tap. And when mayor is naked on television, it really works. That's communication, and people, and it could be seen like 20-30% drop in water usage and that kind of stuff. And he also introduced the cycling lane systems for the Sundays, that they closed all the roads and the cycling things, and now they are building first the pedestrian and cycling paths, and when money runs out and when they get more money, they put the payment to the road. So kind of really inspirational leader from the front, but I don't know.
So how do you spell Peñalosa?
And actually I'm thinking there are several very wonderful mayors in Bogota. Peñalosa was one of them, but the one who did the clowns, I think, is...
How do I spell it, please?
It's P-E-N with a tilde, A-L-O-S-A.
Peñalosa. Thank you.
P-E-N-A-L-O-S-A. Yes, that's right. And there's another one also. I can't remember his name.
Okay.
Yeah, they were always changing, like they reformed.
I imagine seeing the mayor on TV naked is enough to reduce anybody's water usage.
Jaime Lerner in Curitiba also did quite a few creative things, including having the city support newsletters at the neighborhood and district level that were written and published by the neighborhoods themselves. And that reached a whole other segment of people who weren't necessarily reading the city's websites. And this was even before the web, but subsequently, or the traditional newspapers.
That's very interesting. It's a pattern, gentlemen. Oh, there's a lady up there, Colin. You probably can't even see her over there.
I think relating to the topic of flow of information, around which this weekend is built as well, all the data that we can now capture, etc. I think it's probably quite significant for cities to notice that there is still loads of people unconnected or unable to connect, and so building all these support mechanisms or engagement mechanisms around these new technologies might not, or I think is definitely insufficient, and it excludes a lot of people from actually shaping their city in ways that might be beneficial to everyone, even the disconnected or the connected people.
So before you go, can I ask you, so are you talking about people who have no domicile? Are you talking about people who are disconnected from the infrastructure altogether? People live under bridges? What are we talking about here?
Well, I think in certain ways, every one of us is still connected. I mean, some people are more connected than others, and people are less connected. The types of data we're gathering, I don't know about, for example, I don't know, I can relate it maybe to transport, optimizing transport systems. People that, in London, for example, people that travel on buses, there's not that amount of detail about their requirements captured as is for people who maybe have the money to travel on the tube. So already our capability to improve those services will be more directed at
those who
people that are
affect it
more
already.
connected, people
Yeah.
that have more money,
Okay.
excluding maybe people that from the outset
Okay.
are less on the map, in a sense, on the digital map.
Yeah.
So I think that tells a lot about maybe, new, completely different mechanisms of engagement that cities still need to seek out, even in a digital age.
Very good point, thank you. Two gentlemen, use the term loosely.
Excuse me, but it's like we're talking here about as if cities were direct democracies, and they're not.
Yeah.
I mean, most of us live,
Yeah.
we elect a representative who makes decisions on our behalf. And so, to me, maybe this is part of the social engagement mechanisms, but my concern is a supportive city would have a transparent process of making decisions, a transparent governance process. And that understands that not every decision reflects, what a poll of citizens might want to do. Not every decision reflects that, but at least we understand how that decision was made.
Yes.
I think another way of saying this is that there isn't a shadow government unless it's, well, there always is a shadow government.
Right. It's a civil service.
More in some places than others. But that we have an understanding of what the agenda of that shadow government is and how we're interacting with it.
Thank you.
I can expand a little there. I'd make a distinction here between governance as it applies to what may be relatively long-term activities, developing a new subdivision or putting in a new road, whatever it might be, versus more or less instantaneous decision-making. When I decide I want the lights on, I want to push the switch and have the lights come on, right? And in doing that, I am causing the electricity system to adapt to my need. So my sort of operational understanding of supportive city would have it that it has a degree of flexibility in how it responds to the instantaneous, the hour-to-hour, day-to-day needs of its citizens. And that there'll be some rules around how that adaptation and responsiveness takes place. And maybe you need a governance model about defining those rules. But instantaneously, I think we just want the light to come on.
Yeah.
So I think based on what the problem is, we need to have a vast array of tool sets to deal with this. And as you said, some of them are virtual, some of them are not, some of them are physical, some of them may be through television. But there needs to be a lot of research on what works in what circumstances, and that they should be, and some of them are actually common sense and they should be applied. I remember I was in a project with a major hospital in a city center, and there was a disagreement between this, at the conception phase, of whether to bring the tram right into the heart of the hospital, where there would be a big arch so people wouldn't get wet and they can step into the hospital, or not, or just bypass it. And they could have quite easily taken that to the local television and then asked people to vote. But nothing like that happened, just the politics in the room prevailed, and there was no tram station at the end of the day. So depending on what the problem, and then there was the other issue of when we talked about domestic housing, and people don't want to manage don't even know how to manage their energy, and they're quite happy for it to be automated.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Any mechanism we can develop, there's a lady up there, any mechanisms we can develop that can gather insight and opinion without requesting it are very, very important.
Yeah, and I think maybe along the same lines, we might think that what we want to be, for example, to be able to drive from one place to the other very easily, but that's maybe not actually a supportive city to allow the individual to do whatever he or she wants.
Right.
It's probably better for that person to ride a bike from A to B.
You're big on health over there,
I am
aren't
big
you?
on health, yes. And Mokus was the mayor within the clouds.
Mokus. Thank you. Colin, we're 5 minutes over. Over our agenda. 10:30 we're supposed to stop. I
Oh, we
believe.
are?
Yes.
We've still got one more to do, at least.
We do.
We only just started on this one.
So we can take time
I
out
think
from...
this is going very well. I've been, this is helping to shape and structure some of the thinking that we've been debating.
Okay. B-O-G-U-S or B-O-C-U? Oh, sheesh. Nothing is as it sounds. Okay. Rick, this baby's yours and ours. Quality of life. How should we define this?
Yeah. I spent a little bit of time yesterday evening putting some more structure around what came out of our discussions yesterday.
Yeah.
So I'll try to describe that now, but I think it's only a starting point.
Sure.
I think we need to start this with some sort of framework about what matters to people about quality of life. And we used Maslow's hierarchy yesterday to do that. You could probably argue that it may need to be extended or adapted, but it seemed to be a good starting point. So I think we need that. I think we then need to understand the dimensions by which people's attitude to various elements of that hierarchy vary. So, for instance, it matters according to culture. It varies according to one's age as we pass through life. And so that, there's probably some other aspects of that, so it needs to be made more rich. And then we need to understand how different urban contexts support elements of quality of life, and the data from those urban contexts that's available to quantify how they're supporting quality of life. So we looked at various things such as the availability of food, quality of food, performance of transport systems, higher level indicators such as economic wealth, inequality, creativity as measured by things like creation of patents or rate of startup of business. So there is a huge framework there, I think, of things we care about or need, ways that our attitude to those things varies, and ways that information can inform us about how those values and needs are being met. Mm-hmm. My feeling is that there is probably a vast amount of work out there in different disciplines already addressing some areas of this. For example, there's a multinational university collaboration called the Livable Cities Project that I know that University of Birmingham, for one, are involved in, which I think is trying to set out a framework for understanding what makes cities livable in a very similar way to this. I'd be astonished if there weren't lots of other ones, such as CUSP, and you'll be aware too.
Actually, CUSP hasn't done that yet, but you're right. Anything else?
Some of the aspects of quality of life, I think, go
Hold on,
beyond
Marjan. We're recording you for posterity and for the NSA.
Some of the aspects of quality of life go beyond the city. For example, in the UK, I know one thing which ruins people's lives is the amount of commute. And you need to somehow reduce people. I mean, they talk about, in the adaptive city, we talk about cities which keep their smart people in them. But actually, in reality, what we are seeing is that as the economy gets more and more intelligent, lots of people have to work in a different city, leave their families throughout the week. During the week, everybody, I mean, in the past, 20 years ago, it mainly used to be the salespeople who had to travel up and down the country. But right now, everybody is having to commute hugely. And it's really taking its toll on people and on families and all the rest of it. So this is where I think it goes beyond the city, and it needs maybe more central influences.
I want to make a point about the model we chose, which was Maslow's pyramid. I mean, that wasn't trivial. And I was just so delighted that I think we just sort of simultaneously came to that. is our way of looking at it. So if you think about what that means we chose a model of human consciousness. I mean, one of the more well-known, and there's others, but we chose one of the more known models of human consciousness and made the huge leap of faith that what can be validated and works for the individual can scale to various levels of the city, from a building to a neighborhood, to a city to a region, and that we discovered, in fact, that each of those levels can be quantified. I mean, it's not just a leap of faith. You can actually measure, and there are statistics that prove, for example, things like a percent of voter engagement or so, voter participation or turnout, would certainly be a measure of community engagement in that. And crime statistics or health statistics would measure some of the lower levels of it. Even something as simple as the number of churches or religious organizations, could measure something, would give us a quantitative view of the higher levels. So I just love that idea that we took a model of individual consciousness and scaled it to a larger area and found some success in it.
We're geniuses in our team, that's what it is. Yeah.
Yes, I came a little bit late yesterday to the discussion and followed it, and then also did some reflection afterwards on my own. I've been living, this is from my personal experience, I've been living in Helsinki, which is not a huge city, but it's still the biggest in Finland, and then I also moved to smaller city and made some friends and connections there, and for the point that what people appreciate in city and what in smaller places, I think the quality of life can be good, both in city and in country town or anywhere. And different things attract different people, so probably I might not live the rest of my life in the smaller city, but I completely understand those who live there. But many people move to other place not because they want to go to the better city, but because they don't have work where they would like to live. So kind of this external things that you have to commute, for example, you have to spend time in your car or airplane. What kind of restrictions comes from there? So it was me who commented yesterday that maybe how can you quantify the quality of life is that the less time and money you need to spend in order to get what you want, and not to do things that you don't really want to do, like commuting, for example. So one thing that I want to make point now is that as the quality of life can be very good both in countryside and in the city, so what is actually the difference of countryside and the city? I think in the cities there is lots more speed, development, innovation, things like that, because people are concentrated and meet lots of each other, and economy is running faster in the cities. And that should be separated from the discussion of the quality of life. Mm-hmm. Like good economy, it can be base for good quality of life, but that's not really the same thing.
Yeah. Right. There's clearly many factors involved in this thing called quality of life, and we have to go see, as Rick said, we have to see what's been done in the past, but we also have to figure out what it means.
So as Antti was framing it there, it called to mind some of the origins of this meeting, going back about a year to the meeting we had in Berkeley, when I was first thinking about what we might do in 2013. And at that time, I framed this in terms of the city as design problem. So thinking of the city, and by design here, I don't mean urban design, but design in terms of Steve Jobs. So factors such as the usability of the city, ease of use, is kind of close to, I think, your idea of minimizing the stress required to accomplish your daily life. Or a factor like discoverability, how do I figure out what the city, the affordabilities, as Rick described earlier on, or accessibility, how easy is it for me to actually get to the functionality, the capabilities of the city. So this discussion we were having yesterday in the group that Marjan was leading, though, did have quite a few thoughts on the relationship between flows of information and quality of life. I don't know if anyone in that group would like to comment on that.
In terms of the balance, that balance.
Yes, that was one of the areas.
Yes. It was to do with the intrusion of too much information with the quality of life, both for on a personal level, but also again on a more family level, community level, etc. And finding the balances which need to be found between those areas. Is that the area you're referring to?
Yeah, that was one major area.
Yeah.
I think another one that we touched on briefly earlier on here was we had quite a bit of discussion about the smart home and the idea of what's called the Nest, this machine learning thermostat, beautiful piece of art as well. Because in many cases where we've been talking about the adaptive city or the personalized city, I think we've mentioned already, many people simply don't want to bother with that. I might well be in that category myself. I just get tired of constantly configuring things to do what I want. I'd just rather it learned from me. It goes back to the question I asked earlier on about, should we expect citizens to actively take part in this governance process we talked about, or should the city be attempting to learn from observation on how to adapt itself to the citizens' needs?
I think at the right place, the self-learning systems will play a major role.
An example of a self-learning system, an experiment we did in the Pacific Northwest with 120 homes, and now repeating with something like 60,000 homes and businesses. This time it's the latest one is with about 15 utilities in about 5 different states in the Northwest. The intent here is to figure out what do people want as far as energy usage is concerned. Our first experiment was to hook up this software thermostat we gave everybody, which said maximum savings in expenses or maximum comfort. And the citizens allowed us to control their high energy usage devices like heating and cooling. Right? And what they did was they just set the thermostat to one of these settings. And the thermostat actually went out, bought electrical power according to the financial constraints, so either in the real-time contract, long-term contract, a number of different contracts. And then it adapted the savings to their usage. And what we found was people saved between 8 and 10%, right, with just using that. If you track where people go with a cell phone, if they allow you, you can get a very good idea of the things they do. So, for example, and I'll show you this afternoon, in looking at people moving in Istanbul, we see a number of patterns. We see a pattern of this cell phone which has been anonymized, going from this location at 8 in the morning to 9 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 5 times a week, 6 times a week. What's that? Work, right? 8 o'clock, 8:45, 9 o'clock, 5:45, 8 o'clock. What's that? Dropping somebody off. So first of all, you start looking at location. Then you begin to get context. Then you see a person going to the Ford dealer, to a Hyundai dealer, and to a Volkswagen dealer 4 times in 8 weeks. What are they doing? They're looking for a car. So all this metadata can give you a lot of insights, right, as to what the intent is. And so from this kind of information, if there were a way to make it available transparently so you knew it wasn't being abused, there's a lot that you could determine. There's theories that say you can even determine the health of a person by the way in which they select the numbers on the dial. There's a way to detect their health in the way they walk. There's so many things that could be done if we were sure that that information was not being misused.
Would that not lead to an excessive marketing which is happening all the time.
Well, that's what I'm saying. As long as we had ways to control and make sure that, quote, that information is not misused. Yeah. So if they're over-marketing to you, then that's misuse, right? There should be a way in which that can be controlled. Okay, I think, is a good time now, I think? Time for a break, a cup of tea, and a couple of biscuits. So we're up there in the balcony.
Do you want to come back in here, or do you want to
Let's briefly come back in here. We can give people instructions. Thanks. Yeah. Thank you.